My name is Hannah. I'm 31, and the night my father stood up at his own 58th birthday dinner and called me uneducated trash in front of 11 relatives, I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I didn't remind him of a single thing I'd done for that family. I just stood up, picked up my coat, and said, okay. He didn't know that the mortgage payment hitting his account every month for the past 2 years had my name on the transfer. He didn't know my little online thing, as he called it, had crossed 8 figures the year before. He didn't know any of it because I'd spent my whole adult life hiding my success from the one family who'd taught me success only counted if it came with a diploma on the wall. I walked out of that house at 9:40 p.m. By sunrise, I'd packed 2 suitcases, canceled 3 automatic transfers, and left the state. 3 weeks later, my brother showed up at my new front door, not to apologize, but to ask for money. What I told him is the reason this story exists. Welcome to Miss Rachel. New story every day. Let's get into it. I grew up outside Cincinnati in a house where there was exactly one acceptable definition of a good life: a 4-year degree, a steady job with a pension, a house in a subdivision with a name like Maple Ridge Estates, and absolutely no deviation from that script. My father Gary spent 34 years as a plant supervisor at the same manufacturing company. He wore that consistency like a medal. My mother Diane ran the front office at a dental practice and reinforced every one of my father's rules, just with a softer voice and a tighter smile. My older brother Mark did everything right by their standards. Business degree, entry-level job at a regional bank, married young, bought a house in the right zip code. My parents introduced him at every family gathering like he was a press release. I was the complicated one. At 12, I was reselling sneakers I'd bought on clearance to kids at school, and I'd taught myself enough basic coding from library books to build my own listing page before I understood what a listing page was. At 16, I was running social media accounts for 2 small local businesses for $40 a week, which felt like a fortune. My father called it playing on the computer. My mother said, "It's cute, but it's not a real plan, sweetheart." When I told them at 19 that I was leaving community college to work full-time on an e-commerce platform I'd started, a small operation helping independent jewelry makers sell direct instead of losing 40% of their margin to big marketplaces, my father looked at me like I told him I was joining a cult. He said dropping out, even from a 2-year program, was throwing away the one thing nobody could take from me. He said no serious person would ever trust a college dropout with anything that mattered. My mother cried, not because she thought I'd fail, but because she was already rehearsing what she'd say to the neighbors. I left anyway. I moved into a 500-square-foot apartment above a dry cleaner and started building. I'm not going to pretend the next decade was a straight line, because it wasn't. I maxed out 2 credit cards in my first year figuring out fulfillment logistics the hard way. I lost an entire holiday season to a shipping partner who folded without warning. I worked out of that apartment for 3 years before I could afford an actual warehouse space, and even then it was a corner of someone else's building that smelled like motor oil. But every mistake taught me something nobody in a classroom could have. By 24, I had 12 employees. By 27, I had built real infrastructure, fulfillment centers in 2 states, a software layer that helped small makers manage inventory and pricing without losing themselves to spreadsheets, and partnerships with over 600 independent sellers across the country. By 30, my personal stake in the company had crossed 8 figures. I'd turned down one acquisition offer because I wasn't done building, and I genuinely loved the people I worked with. I never told my family the real numbers. I told myself it was because I didn't want money to change how they treated me. The truth, the uglier truth, was that some small, stubborn part of me still wanted them to be proud of me before they knew what I was worth. I wanted the pride to come first, freely, not as a reaction to a number. So I kept showing up small. When my mother's car needed a transmission rebuild she couldn't afford, an insurance settlement mysteriously covered it. When my father's mortgage refinance fell through and the bank wanted a larger down payment to avoid a rate hike, a retirement account distribution appeared right on time, and I quietly started covering the monthly difference myself, every month for 2 years, through an automatic transfer he assumed was coming from his own restructured loan terms. When Mark's wife wanted a wedding neither of them could afford, the deposit for the venue cleared 3 days before the cancellation deadline, and nobody ever asked how. I sent help constantly. I was treated like the family disappointment at every dinner. My father's 58th birthday was at my parents' house. 11 people. Aunts, uncles, Mark and his wife, my grandmother. I brought a gift I'd planned for months, a fully funded retirement supplement structured properly through my financial advisor, enough that my parents would never have to worry about their mortgage or medical costs again. Not flashy. Not a stunt. I genuinely wanted them to stop carrying stress they didn't need to carry. I also brought something I'm embarrassed to admit now, a quiet, stubborn hope that if I finally showed them the truth calmly, without making it a performance, they might finally see me. Dinner went the way these dinners always go. My mother fussed over the roast. Mark inserted financial jargon into every sentence because he loved sounding important. My father held court at the head of the table. Nobody asked me a single real question about my life. After dessert, I set the folder beside my father's plate. He opened it slowly, frowned at the numbers, asked what exactly he was looking at. I explained as plainly as I could that the company had crossed another valuation milestone, that I'd structured this for their future, that I loved them and wanted them taken care of. The table went silent in that specific way. A room goes silent right before it gets ugly. Mark laughed first, and it wasn't a kind sound. He asked if this was one of those internet money things where people post screenshots of numbers that don't mean anything. My mother asked in a small voice, "Hannah, is this real?" My father just stared at the papers like they personally insulted him. Then he asked, with real disgust in his voice, if I thought throwing money around made me equal to people who'd done it the right way. I said it wasn't about equality. It was about care. I said I'd been helping for years, quietly, because I never wanted anyone to feel exposed by needing it. That's when it detonated. I should have stopped there. I didn't. Maybe I was tired of being the family secret. Maybe some old wound finally tore all the way open. I told them, not every detail, but enough. I told them about the transmission, about the mortgage refinance gap I'd been quietly covering every single month for 2 years, about the wedding deposit. I didn't say it to shame anyone. I said it because, for once, I wanted the truth to exist out loud in that room, instead of hiding in a bank transfer log only I could see. My father stood up so fast his chair scraped the floor. He didn't look grateful. He looked cornered, the way people look when they realize they've been living inside someone else's quiet generosity and hating that person at the same time. Mark asked if this made him some kind of charity case. My mother started crying, asking why I'd done it all in secret, as if the answer hadn't been sitting at the head of that table for 30 years. Then my father started shouting. He said I'd walked into his house trying to buy authority. He said money made by a college dropout meant nothing to him. He said I had no right to make people with real degrees feel small in their own home. I kept my voice level. That seemed to make it worse. He pointed at the door. "You're still uneducated trash with good timing," he said. Then louder, because cruelty likes an audience, "Get out of my house, you lowlife, and don't come back here acting like money makes you one of us. One of us." As if I'd ever actually been allowed to be. I picked up my coat. I looked at my mother, who stared at the table. I looked at Mark, who looked almost pleased, like something he'd been nursing for years had finally won. I looked at my father and said, "Okay, no speech, no tears, no begging anyone in that room to defend me." I walked out. I sat in my car in their driveway for almost 2 full minutes without starting the engine. I didn't cry right away. I just felt something inside me go cold and clean. Not broken. Finished. By the time I pulled away from the curb, I'd already made the decision. I drove home and I didn't sleep. I packed 2 suitcases. I canceled the automatic transfer covering my father's mortgage gap. The one he didn't know existed. The one that had been quietly making his life easier for 2 years, while he called me trash at his own birthday party. I left a brief, neutral voicemail for my mother, the only one I owed an explanation to, telling her I needed distance and I'd be in touch when I was ready. I didn't call my father. I didn't call Mark. By sunrise, I was on the highway, heading to a coastal property in North Carolina I'd quietly bought 2 years earlier as an investment. A restored cottage I'd told myself I might use someday when life got less crowded. I spent the first week stripping that house of anything that felt borrowed. I unpacked pieces from the artisans and makers I'd worked with for a decade. I deleted the family group chat. I didn't burn anything dramatic. I'm not much for rituals, but I did sit on that porch the first night and feel for the first time in years like I wasn't bracing for someone's disapproval. I started sleeping through the night again. I adopted a rescue dog with a torn ear and named her Maple, which felt like a quiet joke only I understood. I leased a small studio space downtown and started hosting workshops for independent makers and small business owners who'd been told their ambition was unrealistic one too many times. The first one was supposed to be 15 people. 52 showed up. 3 weeks after I left, Mark showed up at my front door on a Saturday afternoon. He didn't apologize. He opened with family, said Dad had been stressed, that birthdays made people emotional, that maybe I'd taken it too personally. Then he got to the real reason. A property deal he'd been counting on had fallen through. He needed a bridge loan fast. Just a temporary thing, he said, between siblings. I asked if he'd driven 6 hours to apologize or to collect. He didn't like that question. He started talking about blood, about loyalty, about all the words people use when they want access without accountability. Mid-sentence, my phone rang. My operations director, on speaker, because I'd been reviewing a contract that morning. I let him hear me confirm terms on a new 7-figure distribution partnership and approve the next phase of an expansion into 2 new states. I didn't lower my voice. I didn't send it to voicemail. I didn't perform modesty for him anymore. When I hung up, he was looking at me like he'd just met a stranger wearing my face. I told him no. Not no for now. No for now. No bridge loan. No quiet rescue. No more private funding for a family that publicly humiliated me and privately depended on my silence. He told me Dad had been right about me all along, that success had made me cold. I told him success hadn't made me cold. I told him success hadn't changed me at all. It had simply made it impossible for people like him to keep pretending I owed them everything while deserving nothing in return. He left angry. He also left, I think, genuinely shaken. I later learned Mark drove straight back to Cincinnati and told everyone exactly what he'd seen and heard. The call, the numbers, the version of me they'd never bothered to look at closely enough to notice. A regional business publication ran a feature on the company a month later. The workshops, the unconventional path. It mentioned, without naming anyone, how some of the most capable founders get dismissed by the people closest to them. Because pride matters more to those people than perception ever will. That piece traveled further than I expected. Old classmates messaged me. Cousins who'd ignored me for a decade started commenting on it like we'd always been close. And somewhere in Cincinnati, my family found themselves standing inside a story about me that they no longer controlled. My mother called eventually, not to ask for anything, just to say she was proud of me, quietly, the way she should have said it years earlier when it would have meant something different. I let her back in, carefully, on my terms, at my pace. My father has not called. I've made peace with the possibility that he never will. I no longer wait by a phone for permission to feel proud of what I built. Here's what I want to leave you with. You can love people and still stop financing the version of yourself they're comfortable insulting. You can help your family for years and still owe them nothing once they hand you the door and call it justice. Quiet generosity is not a debt someone gets to collect on while insulting the hand that gave it. If this story felt familiar, drop a comment below. You don't need anyone's degree, approval, or permission to call your own life real. Subscribe to Miss Rachel. New story every single day. I'll see you in the next one.